Hi friends, welcome back to another episode of Generation Tech. My name is Alan. One of the most iconic starfighters of the prequel era in Star Wars is the Delta 7 Aethersprite Light Interceptor. It was one of the more sleek and beautiful starfighter designs the galaxy had seen. It clearly took some design cues from classic Old Republic class starfighters and would itself inspire the next generation of starfighters like the A-Wing Interceptor. The Jedi Order first began testing the Delta 7 platform as a potential replacement for the aging Delta 6 platform used by the Jedi Starfighter Corps at the time. Several Jedi, including Obi-Wan Kenobi, Adi Gallia, and Sassy Tin, would test pilot this starcraft and found it reasonably good at its job. For the manufacturers of the Delta 7, Quad Systems Engineering, securing the Jedi contract was a huge win for their overall image and starfighter product line. But just a decade later, the Clone Wars would begin, and the Delta 7 would be put through a gauntlet of challenges that it ultimately would perform poorly in, leading to the Delta 7's replacement in the middle of the conflict. Today I want to take a look at some of the major design flaws in the Delta 7 and why the Jedi ultimately had to replace this starfighter. There is no denying that the Delta 7 is a work of art. Like a fine sports car, its lines are perfectly designed for speed and performance. But like a track day car, the Delta 7 Aethersprite is also missing a lot of important components that you would want on a starfighter, especially a starfighter that needs to survive an intense dogfight or space battle with large amounts of ship's debris and crossfire. The Delta 7's very minimalistic approach and lack of heavy weapons kind of reflects the tastes and styles of the core worlds at the time. Everything was about style and optics, and war and militarism were just not in vogue. The Jedi were not a part of the military. They weren't even a part of the judicial forces. They were mainly seen as peacekeepers and diplomats. The starships they were supposed to use reflected their position and status in the galaxy. And so flying a proper military designed starfighter, which is heavily equipped with defensive and offensive measures, is probably not wise for the Jedi Order's image. Therefore, what we're essentially looking at here with the Delta 7 Aethersprite is a civilian ship. And so with that in mind, the Delta 7 Aethersprite comes very lightly equipped when it comes to offensive capabilities. It just has one pair of time laser cannons. They're neatly built into two recesses at the front of the ship and could easily be mistaken as light fixtures by a casual observer walking by. The Jedi, again, were supposed to bring peace and stability with their presence, not destruction and fear. Which consequently also meant that no ion torpedoes or concussion missiles, and definitely not proton torpedoes, could be mounted onto this vessel. Now, after serving as a starfighter pilot myself in Star Wars Squadrons VR, I've come to a realization about just how important it is to have some type of guided munitions on board. Not only for attacking larger ships and weapons emplacements, but also for tackling enemy fighters. As much as I respect the ancient skill of drawing a bead on an enemy fighter during a dogfight, boresight laser weapons are so Old Republic by this point. Especially when you've used the multi-lock weapon system that can track multiple starfighters at the same time and then simultaneously launch all your missiles at them at the same time. It's just too easy. Having two lasers on a civilian patrol airspeeder might be okay, but it's really unacceptable for a ship designed for combat. Another thing that I learned from my brutal time on the battlefield as a veteran of the Star Wars Squadrons video game is just how necessary countermeasures are. It's a little covered part of Star Wars battle tactics, and we oftentimes don't get to see it because, well, we're usually following around the Jedi in their Delta 7s and Eta Actis 2s, which don't actually have countermeasures on board. Either for weight-saving or cost-saving measures, the Delta 7 requires the pilot to just manually outsteer a guided munition chasing them, which is incredibly difficult. For one, that missile does not have organic beings inside of it, so it's not susceptible to G-forces, and so it more or less can outturn and outmaneuver any starfighter that's ever been created. Your average military starfighter is going to have electric countermeasures, maybe chaff particles that can launch out, even anti-munition missiles that can seek out and intercept anything that's heading towards you. The Delta 7, on the other hand, has a trunk full of spare parts that by no means is a reliable replacement for proper countermeasures. And during the Clone Wars, it was extremely important to have countermeasures, especially when going up against the Confederacy of Independent Systems. These guys loved using all sorts of guided munitions, including the dreaded Buzz Droid Discord missiles. It was extremely important to destroy these type of munitions before they released their payload. The Delta 7 Aethersprite was designed by Wallace Blissix, the famous starfighter engineer who would eventually be responsible for the Imperial-class Star Destroyer design. He would work hand in hand with the Jedi Order to custom create this starfighter for the Jedi standards, which basically wanted him to make the ship as agile and maneuverable and as fast as possible. Thanks to the Jedi's Force abilities and their precognitive abilities, the Jedi had a big advantage in the middle of a dogfight. They could basically perceive danger before it struck. But in order to really take advantage of this ability, they had to have a ship that could instantaneously respond to their inputs with minimum latency. And this is why we have a much larger focus on maneuverability over almost any other aspect of the ship. Which is also why the frame of the Delta 7 is made from an ultralight alloy and has almost no armor plating on it. The J4 deflector generators on board come from Serplex, which would also be known for manufacturing the shielding for the A-Wings. Now, this company's products were usually very light and power efficient, but they weren't really up to the standards of military-grade deflector shields. No matter how skilled you are as a pilot or even Jedi in a pitched battle, your shields can be the difference between life and death, so make sure they're durable. With a height of just 1.44 meters or 1 Danny DeVito, the Delta 7 has an extremely thin hull that lacks space for almost anything, including even an astromech. It did, however, have a special socket that could only fit the head of an astromech, which meant that you basically had to disassemble your droid in order to use it. Astromechs were very important because they alone had the computing power on a ship to calculate hyperspace jumps. Without them, hyperspace travel was incredibly dangerous and difficult, even for powerful Jedi explorers who might be able to navigate hyperspace lanes with the Force. To make matters worse, not only did you have to cut an astromech's head off in order to put it in that socket, once you placed the astromech in the socket, it was extremely complicated removing these droids, so they were more or less left on there permanently. And in order to go into hyperspace, the Delta 7 actually relied on a hyperspace ring, which wasn't the most practical piece of technology. For one, they had to be deployed from larger ships like a Venator-class Star Destroyer. You couldn't really take off or land with one of these unwieldy devices surrounding your ship, and they definitely weren't designed to handle the stress of a dogfight. This meant that when you entered a new system with one of these rings, you had to just kind of leave it behind. If you were in a hostile or sketchy system, it's very likely that someone is going to steal your hyperspace ring or even destroy it. Or maybe if you have some enemies that really want to come after you, they'll just wait for you to come back to your hyperspace ring and set an ambush right there. The docking procedure also took some time and finesse as well, so it was extremely hard to perform while under heavy enemy fire or while you're being chased. Like a lot of things about the Delta 7B, the hyperspace ring was a flawed concept and just exposed the pilot to more danger. Given the nature of a Jedi's job, which involved adventuring, exploring, traveling to far off distant planets in the corner of the galaxy, the Delta 7B had a surprisingly short range. On board, it only had enough fuel for 5 hours of sublight flight and 5 hours of oxygen. The small trunk at the rear of the vessel could only hold around 60 kilos worth of equipment, and the food and consumables that were there for emergency purposes were actually stored on the hyperspace ring and not on the ship itself. The Delta 7 needed constant support and refueling and was not really built for long-range travel. Therefore, it wasn't a good fit for the Jedi Order. When Wallace Blissix designed the Aethersprite 7, not only did he remove a lot of the weight and armor from the ship, he also removed what a lot of people would consider essential systems for a starfighter. This included targeting computers, a variety of sensors that monitor the ship's performance, along with sensors that scan the area around the ship. The Jedi were basically the Star Wars equivalent of a gearhead complaining that his new ride has way too many assists like power steering, ABS, and traction control. And while it certainly is more fun to steer vehicles with more analog and manual controls than a computer-guided vehicle, when it comes to state-of-the-art starfighters designed for war, it doesn't really make sense to eliminate all these technologies which are designed to make your life easier. A pilot really should be given the choice of whether they want to turn off or turn on these pilot assists. Not every Jedi is going to be as skilled in the cockpit as Anakin Skywalker or Master Tin, so it makes sense to make these ships more accessible. This way you'll also be able to have non-Jedi pilots flying this thing as well. I'm sure a lot of valets on Coruscant died trying to figure out how to fly this thing after, a Jedi dropped it off at a fancy restaurant. Well guys, let me know in the comment section below if I've missed any other features that the Delta 7B has that could be considered a flaw. Also, don't forget to subscribe and hit that notification button down below so you don't miss out on the rest of our awesome content. And as usual, thanks for joining us today. If you're watching this, you are Generation Tech.